October 27th, 1945, outside Hutchinson, Kansas. The air was dry with chaff and cold enough to sting the tip of Tanaka Aiko's nose. From inside the red-sided barn came a rush of sound she had never heard in all her years of war. An American accordion pumping out a cheerful reel, a fiddle sawing over it, boots striking polished pine in an easy, unashamed rhythm. Kerosene lamps swung from rafters. Straw and fresh-cut lumber smelled warmer than the October night. 2 U.S. Army MPs in M1943 field jackets stood by the doors, armbands bright in the lamplight, but even they were tapping their heels. Aiko, Naval Nurse 3rd Class, Imperial Japanese Navy, Himeji-born, captured and sent across the ocean, stood in her issued olive drab coat, unsure whether to look away. Inside, farm girls in gingham twirled with men home from Europe, shoulders loose, laughing with mouths wide open. No salute, no bow, no inspection. Just music. One gray-haired woman near the door smiled at her, not unkindly. "You can dance too, if you like," she said, that Midwestern English rounded and soft. Dance, with the enemy, under lanterns and harvest bunting. Aiko's fingers tightened on the edge of her woolen mittens. This was indecent. This was disarming. If stories like this matter to you, remember to stay with us and tell us where you're listening from. 6 weeks earlier, Fort Riley POW Processing Compound, Kansas. The intake tent at Fort Riley smelled of carbolic, canvas, and November already coming. Aiko stood in line with 6 other Japanese women, each holding the manila tag they had been given when they disembarked on the West Coast. An American corporal behind a field desk banged at a typewriter, pausing only to glance up to confirm faces. This too was war, quiet, clerical, absolute. "Name?" he asked the interpreter, who gestured to Aiko. "Tanaka Aiko," she said in careful English, chin level. "Imperial Navy, nursing rate." The corporal's eyebrows rose. Female, Navy, Japanese. He typed anyway. Behind him, a sergeant with an MP band thumbed through a folder stamped with red regulations. "These gals go to the farm detail," he called over his shoulder. "Yeah, harvest work. Colonel said they're not trouble." Not trouble. The phrase landed strangely. To an enemy, she was manageable. They were issued extra wool layers. U.S. Army women's sizes didn't fit, so the quartermaster handed over small men's field jackets instead. Aiko slipped hers on, surprised at the warmth. No one shouted. No one paraded them for shame. The MP simply watched, boots planted, Thompson slung, bored but alert. Outside, through the open flap, she saw Kansas sky, high, pale, and nothing like the seas she had crossed. Trucks rattled in the yard. 2 American women in headscarves laughed with a soldier as they loaded crates of apples onto a flatbed. Apples. Laughter. After surrender. An NCO passing by said to the sergeant, "Get him on the list for Hutchinson branch. Farms need hands before the cold sets in." Hutchinson. Farms. A branch camp, not a prison stockade. Aiko kept her face unreadable, but inside something shifted, as if the steel brace of her expectations had loosened half a turn. The enemy was making room for her to work. The train pulled out of Fort Riley just after midday, a short column of olive drab coaches that had carried too many uniforms in the last 4 years. Inside, the women sat 2 to a bench, their U.S. issue jackets buttoned, duffel bags under their feet. An MP stood at each end of the car, helmets on, web gear correct, Thompson hanging in the easy American way, as if danger was unlikely, but procedure was sacred. Aiko angled herself toward the window. Beyond the glass, Kansas unrolled in long, stubbled fields and windbreaks of bare trees. Farmhouses sat far apart, each with its own barn, its own truck, its own standing silo. Even in late 1945, even after shipping millions of men overseas, the Americans had trucks sitting in yards. That, more than any leaflet, spoke of industrial weight. When they neared a town, the forward MP reached up and pulled the blind halfway down. "Just routine, ma'am," he said without looking at her. It wasn't hostile. It was containment. Across the aisle, Nakamura whispered in Japanese, "Don't let it soften you. They will send us home, and we must remember." "I am only looking," Aiko answered, also in Japanese, eyes still on the narrow gap of glass. Through that gap she caught it, a white-painted board outside a clapboard church, letters neat and black, Harvest Social, OCT, 27, all welcome. Beside it, on a barn across the road, bunting hung in faded stripes, already in place. Celebration, in a land that had not been bombed. The train rattled on. From another car, faint through the corridor, came an American radio voice, nasal and cheerful, introducing a dance tune. The rhythm did not match any parade march she knew. It was loose, made for people who expected to live. Aiko sat back, holding the image of the sign in her mind. If such a thing existed openly, then the farmer's casual invitation later would not be a trap, but part of something the whole region did every autumn. The branch camp was nothing like the barbed wire stockades she had imagined on the ocean crossing. It was a rectangle of low wooden huts set beside a broad Kansas field, with a single guard tower that looked more ceremonial than threatening. The wire was there, yes, but it ran low and clean, and beyond it sat a red barn, a corn crib, and a house with white trim that needed painting. War and peace were sharing the same fence line. Staff Sergeant Miller, tall, sun-reddened, with sleeves rolled, met them at the gate. "You ladies work in pairs. No wandering. You need water, you tell the guard," he said, speaking slower than usual, aware of their English. His tone was supervisory, not hateful. They were handed field gloves and set to sorting and bundling the last of the corn under the eye of one MP. Aiko fell into the rhythm easily. Pick up, strip leaves, set aside, stack. It was precise in its own way, like ward work. The October sun was low but warm. From the house, the smell of something baking drifted across. Fat, flour, maybe apples. The farmer's wife came out mid-afternoon, wiping her hands on her apron. She was older than Aiko's mother would have been, hair pinned back, eyes bright with the curiosity of someone who had not seen the Pacific War up close. She watched the neat stacks the Japanese women were making. "They're tidy," she said to Miller. Then, to the women, slowly, "Very good. End of month we do music. In the barn. You can listen. By the wall. By the wall. Permission wrapped in a boundary." Aiko bowed her head slightly, the closest she could come to thanks without overstepping. The woman smiled as if it were settled. That evening, in the hut, the others would repeat it in low voices. Music, in the barn. We can listen. The invitation had already become a problem to solve. Night dropped early, and the hut held the day's warmth badly. A potbelly stove ticked in the corner, red at the seams. The women sat on their cots or low stools, jackets draped over shoulders, hair loosened from work. Outside, from the guard shack, an American radio played something swing-like, softened by distance. It was a reminder. The invitation was real, because music was already in the air. "It is a mistake," Nakamura said first, her voice flat. She had lost a brother at Saipan and wore that loss like rank. "They will make a spectacle. Enemy women at their celebration." Keiko, younger, fingers still pink from the cold corn, shook her head. She said by the wall, "That is not shameful. We can observe how they do it. We will go home with knowledge." "Knowledge of what? Of their frivolity?" "Of how they gather after war," Keiko said quietly. "That matters." The others glanced at Aiko. She had spoken English to the quartermaster. She had bowed to the farmer's wife with the right weight, neither too shallow nor too deep. Authority in this small room had found her. "If we quarrel," Aiko said, keeping her tone even, "the sergeant will hear. Then the choice will be taken from us." Nakamura's mouth tightened. "So you would go?" "I would know what their invitation means," Aiko answered, "but I will not dance. I will stand as the army said." Silence, except for the stove and the radio outside. Then one of the older women said, "Ask the sergeant what is proper. If he says no, it is finished. If he says yes, we go as Japanese. Straight backs." That settled it. Not the question of whether to go, but the question of who would ask. Aiko felt the decision land on her shoulders. To explain Japanese dignity to Americans, she would first have to see Americans clearly. The sergeant's office was a square of order inside a world of boards and mud. A U.S. flag hung behind the desk. A pot of coffee steamed on a small hot plate. A typewriter sat ready with a sheet rolled in. Through the window, Aiko could see the fenced yard, and beyond, the pale field where they had worked. She stood at parade rest out of habit, hands behind her back. Staff Sergeant Miller looked up. "Tanaka, right?" he said, pronouncing it almost correctly. "You got a question about Saturday?" "Yes, Sergeant," she said. "The farmer's wife invited us to listen. We do not wish to cause trouble. We wish to know limit." That seemed to please him, that she had come to ask boundaries, not favors. He leaned back, chair creaking. "It's not an army function. It's local. Folks are raising money, blowing off steam before winter. Colonel doesn't want headlines about Japs dancing in Kansas." He said it matter-of-factly, not cruelly. "So, you can go. You stand on the side. You don't dance with the men. You don't leave the barn. MPs will be there anyhow." Aiko weighed the words. "We may stand together?" "Yeah, together's fine. Makes it easier to watch." She nodded. "We will be respectable." "I figured," Miller said. He took a sip of coffee. "Look, war's over, but people lost boys in the Pacific. You stay polite. No one minds you listening. Music's music. Music's music." The phrase struck her as oddly generous. "I will tell the others," Aiko said. "Good. And thanks for asking first. Shows good faith." As she stepped back out into the cold, she carried not only the permission, but the shape of it. Americans, too, had lines they would not cross in front of their own people. It made the invitation feel less like a trap and more like an opening that had to be walked through carefully. The sun was almost down when Aiko found her chance. The work detail had ended early, cold pushing people indoors. An MP smoked near the gate, watching the road more than the prisoners. Beyond the fence, the farmer's barn stood with its big doors half open, spilling a triangle of warm light onto the dirt. Voices drifted out, male, easy, unhurried. Then came the sound. Not the drum and bugle she knew from parades in Japan, not the tight martial chorus from newsreels. This was a bellows-warm surge, the accordion breathing in and out like a living creature, laying down chords thick as bread. Over it a fiddle climbed, bright and insistent, playing a tune designed for feet, not for salutes. Aiko stopped just inside the wire, close enough to hear, far enough to pretend she was only looking at the sky. Inside, someone laughed, a chair scraped. She could smell hay and oil, and faintly, apples. Decorations were going up. She saw a boy on a ladder, hook orange and brown bunting along a rafter. It was exactly the kind of American harvest the sign had promised. She glanced at the MP. He didn't wave her off. Maybe he, too, liked the music. The accordion rolled into a livelier part. She could almost map the steps. Forward, turn, swing. Not indecent, structured, but looser than anything taught in naval training. She imagined, for a heartbeat, standing along that wall as the sergeant had said, hands folded, watching farm girls spin in boots. No humiliation, just observation. The thought startled her. Music, it seemed, was how these people rebuilt the air after war. She stepped back toward the hut before anyone could say she was lingering. But now, when she told the others, she would not just say, "There is music." She would be able to say, "It is warm, it is human, and it is meant to pull you in." They were loading crates onto the farm truck when the man arrived. He was in his 40s, farm lean, coat unbuttoned against the October chill, cap pulled low. His pickup rattled to a stop in the yard, and he climbed down with the stiff impatience of someone who had been thinking hard on the drive over. His eyes found the Japanese women immediately, small, uniformed in borrowed olive drab, working in pairs under the MP's gaze. "What's this I hear?" he said to the farmer, not bothering to lower his voice. "About letting them come Saturday?" The MP straightened. Staff Sergeant Miller, who had been speaking with the farmer's wife, turned his head. The farmer tried mildness. "Just to listen, Jim. Stand by the wall. They helped with the corn." "Yeah? My boy helped with the Pacific," Jim snapped. "Didn't come back to listen to songs with the people who shot at him." The words hit Aiko even through the English. Pacific. Didn't come back. This was the cost printed under the Americans' cheer. She kept her eyes down, hands on the crate, making herself small but not cringing. Any display would look like insolence. The farmer's wife wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. "War's over, Jim," she said, firm but not scolding. "Pastor said we're to make peace where we can. They'll be with the soldiers. Nobody's forgetting your boy." Jim's jaw worked. He looked past her at Aiko, as if trying to see a battlefield in her face and failing. "Just don't make a show of 'em," he muttered finally, and climbed back into his truck. As the pickup rolled away, Miller looked over at the MP. "Double up inside the barn," he said. "No one touches anything." Aiko exhaled slowly. Mercy, here, depended on who happened to be standing nearby to say, "War's over." That made it fragile and precious. That night the hut felt like a backstage. The stove glowed, throwing a low orange along the floorboards, and the women laid out what little they had. No silk, no family hairpins, only U.S. Army wool, work shirts, the occasional handkerchief that had made it, across the ocean. Still, they treated each item as if it were better than it was. "We should braid," Keiko said, sitting cross-legged on her cot. "If we cannot wear kimono, at least we can be neat." "Not too elaborate," Aiko answered. "Sergeant said no show. We must look respectful." She searched for the English, found it. Plain. She'd managed to wash her jacket earlier, wringing it at the camp tap until the water ran clearer. Now she brushed at the seams with her fingers, picking off loose straw. On the next cot, Nakamura polished her boots with a scrap of cloth until the leather shone darkly. Resistance for her lived in perfect boots. From outside, the radio at the guard post found another American tune. Not accordion this time, but the same unhurried confidence. It drifted through the boards, reminding them of what tomorrow would sound like. One of the older women produced a small tin from her duffel, a Red Cross soap almost used up. "For faces," she said. They passed it around, each taking only a little, dabbing at cheeks, necks, the back of the hands. War had left them with so few gestures of selfhood that even soap felt ceremonial. "We will stand together," someone asked. "Yes," Aiko said. "Together, by the wall, backs straight. If they look, they will see we are not broken." That was the compromise. American clothes, Japanese carriage. By the time lights out was called, boots were lined in a row, jackets hung to finish drying, and an invisible decision had settled over the hut. Tomorrow, they would step into the enemy's music, but on their own terms. They marched the short distance from the camp to the barn at dusk, 2 MPs in front, 2 behind, the women in their cleaned jackets and polished boots. The October air bit sharper than the night before. From inside the barn came the low murmur of townspeople talking, punctuated by a man's voice near a radio, testing volume. Lanterns along the rafters pushed back the dark in soft circles. At the door, Sergeant Miller stopped them. "Inside, right side wall. Stay together," he said. His tone was practical, not unkind. The nearer MP added, "You're fine, just don't wander." They stepped in. The barn was warmer than the camp huts, full of cut hay smell and people. Bunting hung exactly where Aiko had seen the boy placing it. A big board near the entrance read, in clear letters, "Harvest Fund, Thank You," with a jar on a table beneath it where townsfolk dropped coins and small bills. On another table sat a covered tin that smelled of cinnamon. Heads turned, not all at once, but in little waves, as people noticed the line of Japanese women hugging the wall. Some faces were puzzled. 1 or 2 tightened, remembering sons, but no one spoke against them. The presence of the MPs was eloquent enough. Allowed, supervised. The accordionist, a broad man in shirt sleeves, looked over, gave the smallest nod, and went back to adjusting his straps. Beside him, the fiddler traced a few notes. 2 American girls in gingham dresses, hair curled, glanced at Aiko and Keiko. They didn't smile wide, only dipped their chins in a polite Midwestern greeting, the kind you give to newcomers in church. In that moment, Aiko understood the exact category they had been placed in. Not guests, not prisoners on display. Observers whose good behavior could make the night go smoothly for everyone. The music man called out, "We'll start in 5." People drew closer to the center. Along the wall, the Japanese women straightened, as if for inspection, ready to see how the enemy danced. October 27th, 1945. Outside Hutchinson, Kansas. The air was still dry with chaff, but from inside the barn the sound was no longer strange. It was expected. The accordion pumped out the first real tune, fuller than during rehearsal, the fiddle riding high, and boots struck the pine floor in an easy, practiced beat. Lanterns swung from the rafters, throwing long, warm ovals over faces flushed from work and victory. Along the right-hand wall, the Japanese women stood as Miller had ordered, shoulder to shoulder, hands folded. The MPs were only a few steps away, watchful but relaxed. Aiko let herself look directly now. Farm men in Sunday shirts, girls in gingham, a couple of soldiers home from Europe still wearing their Ike jackets. They moved in pairs, then broke, then reformed, laughing with mouths wide open. No shame, no inspection, just music. The gray-haired woman noticed them and crossed the floor, skirts swishing, stopping short enough not to spook the MPs. "You can dance too if you like," she said, the same sentence Aiko had heard in her mind since the first invitation. Then, remembering, she added, "Just here, with me, we keep space. Dance, with the enemy, under harvest bunting." Aiko glanced at Miller. He gave the smallest nod, within the rules. So Aiko stepped 1 pace from the wall. The woman showed the 3-step, forward, together, back, at arm's length, 2 women mirroring, no touching beyond the air between their hands. The accordion's bellows breathed warm around them. The fiddle urged them to keep time. Aiko's boots, which Nakamura had polished in defiance, sounded clean on the boards. It was not indecent. It was communal. For a heartbeat, Aiko saw how this scene would look told in Japan. Enemy music, enemy barn, enemy woman. But she was here, and the truth was warmer than the story. She followed the step, eyes steady, and let the enemy's rhythm pass through her without taking her name. Morning in the branch camp came pale and cold, as if the barn's warmth had been a dream. Frost edged the yard. Breath showed. The women moved more slowly than usual, each replaying last night in silence. The music, the lantern light on American faces, the way the MPs had watched, but not interfered. From the mess came the smell of coffee and something fried. Aiko sat on her cot with a thin notebook one of the guards had said was okay for English practice. She balanced it on her knee, pencil poised. Outside, boots crossed the yard. A truck coughed to life. She wrote the date carefully, 28 October, 1945. She began not with judgment, but with what her senses knew. Barn, red, lanterns, accordion, fiddle, women stood by wall, Americans danced with happiness. We were permitted to learn step with distance. Her English was simple, but the shape of the truth was there. Nakamura, lacing her boots, watched. "You will tell them in Japan you danced with Americans?" she said, not unkindly, but with the iron of someone who still carried a dead brother. "I will tell them the Americans had rules also," Aiko said, without looking up, "and that they were not cruel. That is dangerous to say." "It is dangerous not to say," Aiko answered softly. "Then the war never ends." She added another line. "One American woman said we could dance. She kept distance to respect soldiers." She underlined respect. That was what had struck her most, that this harvest joy was disciplined, not mocking. A jeep drove past the fence. An MP called out roll. Soon the day's work would begin again, and the barn would go back to being a barn. But on the page, in her uneven English, Aiko fixed the night in place so no future officer, no relative, could erase that in Kansas, in 1945, the enemy let her borrow their rhythm. By mid-November, the talk in camp had changed. Names were being read against lists. Medical officers checked teeth and lungs, and trucks came more often, taking away small groups of prisoners toward railheads that led west. The war felt farther away now, but the machinery of returning prisoners made it present again. Signatures, stamps, the long reach of armies settling accounts. Aiko stood in line for her own check, breath steaming in the cold. Beyond the fence, the field was bare, harvest done. The barn, red against the pale sky, looked ordinary again. Doors closed, no lanterns. If someone drove past today, they would never know that enemy women had once stood inside and kept time with the music. "Name?" the American clerk asked. "Tanaka Aiko." He found her on the sheet. "You'll likely move in a week or two," he said. "Boat out of the coast, once it's ready." A week or two. So little time to keep Kansas in her eyes. Back in the hut, she opened her notebook again and under the barn entry added one more sentence. "When I return, I will say, some Americans were kind after victory." She did not know if any Japanese officer would want to read that, but it would be there. Nakamura was folding her things, slower than usual. "You will tell them?" she asked, half resigned. "I will tell what I saw," Aiko said. "Also, what we lost. Both." Outside, train whistles sounded faintly across the flat land. She listened, and under it, in memory, she heard the accordion. The way its bellows had filled the barn with a patience that did not need to conquer anyone. She closed the notebook, tucking it deep into her duffel. Some memories would travel openly, stamped and inspected. This one would travel hidden. An autumn song from the enemy's barn, proof that even in 1945, in a country untouched by bombs, they had made room on a dance floor for a woman who had once worn their enemy's uniform.